All right. Okay, everyone, welcome again to the fourth week of the Zoroastrianism in post-Sassanian Iran course. We are gradually coming to the end of the dynasties that ruled over Iran over time. We have a couple more to go, and then we'll talk about the fate of the Zoroastrians in these dynasties. Now, in the past, we have talked about the fate of the Zoroastrians in those earlier dynasties. But as Saviours has said so many times, umpteen times, that they could not record anything. If they recorded anything, then it was destroyed. Or if they tried to act smart, their heads would get lopped off. So we have very little information from the earlier times. Now, with the progress of time, we gradually have more information, and we'll talk about that in this presentation. So the Afghans were another dynasty, a short-term dynasty between the Safavid dynasty and the Zand dynasty, which followed the Afghans. So the Afghans were originally called Pashtuns, and they're an Iranian ethnic group from Central and South Asia. The Afghans originally were vassals of the Safavids. They were under the control of the Safavids. The Hotak dynasty was founded by Mirwais Hotak in 1709. The Safid ruler Sultan Hussein forcibly tried to convert the Afghans from Sunni to Twelverism. And if you recall from last week's discussion, Twelverism is a Shia belief that there will be 12 Mahadis or Saviours coming to save the world and Islam. So Mirwais rebelled against this proselytization. He did not want to convert to Twelverism. And so they rebelled, and the Pashtuns came to be called Hotak after its founder. Mirwais Hotak's son, Muhammad Hotaki, another Pashtun, of course, deposed the last Safavid ruler, Shah Sultan Hussein, in 1722. This was also the year that the Russian-Persian war was started. The Russian Tsar, Peter the Great, he started a war to prevent the Ottoman Empire from making any territorial gains in Iran at the expense of the declining Safavid dynasty. Sultan Hussein's son, Timur II, he wanted to regain the Safavid throne, the dynasty that they were losing. And he started seeking the help of some Sunni Afghans, including a tribe called Afshars under Nader Shah for the task. But Nader Shah,
your slide is not working. Your slide is not moving.
It's not working? Okay, let me just go to the original. How about this?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, let's just stick with this. All right. So I guess you missed the first 4 or 5 bullet points. You can, if you don't mind, just kind of glancing over them. I'm at the last point now. So Nader Shah deposed Timur II and made himself king. Again, internal dissension caused his murder, with his reign falling into an anarchy and giving rise to the Zand dynasty. The Afghan dynasty was very short-lived. It was about 50 years, some 60 years, something like that, a very, very short term. Now with the Zand dynasty, the Zands were a tribe in Khorasan during Nader Shah's reign. What Nader Shah did was he moved the Zand people from their homeland in the Zagros Mountains, which is in the western part of Iran, and he moved them to Khorasan, which is eastern Iran, northeast of Iran. Karim Khan Zand was a general in Nader Shah's army. After Nader Shah's death, Karim Khan moved his people back to the original homeland, back to the Zagros mountain area, and they started vying for power with a few contenders. By 1760, Karim Khan gained full control of Iran, except Khorasan, and he established the Zand dynasty. 5 rulers followed Karim Khan, and then the Qajars, who were another tribe of Turkic origin, they were the sworn enemies of the Zands. They could not stand each other. Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar revolted against Karim on a few occasions until he was captured and made a hostage by the Zands. The last Zand ruler, Lutf Ali Khan, tried to just crush the Qajars, at which he failed. He was captured by the Qajars who took over the conquered land with the birth of the Qajar dynasty. Now, the Qajars belonged to the Oghuz tribe. If you recall, the Oghuz tribe was in the northeast of Iran, near the north of the Caspian Sea and north of the Aral Sea. And we talked about that last time, and I had also shown you a map. And you can certainly refer to that from your notes. So the Qajars belong to the Oghuz branch of the Turkic people. The Qajars were one of the 7 tribes supporting the Safavids. The 5th Safavid Shah, Abbas I, resettled the Qajars throughout Iran. The group settled around Astrabad, which is modern-day Gorgan, and rose to power to form the Qajar dynasty. Soon after the death of Karim Khan Zand, the Qajar leader Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar started the unification of Iran. Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar was crowned Shah in 1796. He was assassinated, as were many others, a year later, with his nephew Fath Ali Shah Qajar succeeding him to the Qajar throne. The 5th Qajar monarch, Muzaffar al-Din Shah, was a very inept ruler. Russia was starting to exert influence and power on Muzaffar al-Din Shah. And the Iranians at the time, the other Qajars, the general public was not happy with a foreign power exerting any influence on Iran. So Muzaffar, he promised a constitution with limits on royal power, which was a joke. Muzaffar promised to create a legislative body called Majlis with an aim to represent the people, kind of a democracy, kind of a constitutional government. But notwithstanding all these assurances, despite these assurances, constitutional rule was anything but a reality. The last Qajar, Sultan Qajar Ahmad Shah, succumbed to the occupation of Iran by Russian, British, and Ottoman empires at the start of the First World War, 1914 to 1918. Iran's oil reserves were getting to be kind of an interest to all these foreign powers. And Iran's oil was beginning to play a part in all these foreign countries vying for the rich resource, one reason for all these international conflicts. Reza Khan, and we'll talk about him in the next class, but Reza Khan was a brigadier general with the Persian Cossack Brigade. It was a brigade that was founded by Ahmad Shah. And thus he ended the Qajar dynasty. The Majlis, which had formed by this time, made Reza Khan the new Shah of Imperial Persia. Reza Khan adopted the name Pahlavi to give credence to Iran's heritage based on the language spoken in pre-Islamic Sassanian Iran. A new ruling was in the offing, and that is the Pahlavi dynasty, which will be discussed in the next class. So now let's look at what happened to the Zoroastrians. And now, as I said earlier, we have more information because the information was recorded, maintained, and that's what we have today. And that's why we know what happened in those days. So the survival of the Iranian Zoroastrians under Islam was an ongoing problem. It was a never-ending problem. Nothing had abated. The situation, the conditions of the Zoroastrians were just abominable. Records of the suffering of Zoroastrians are scanty, as I said earlier. As all literature related to religion, customs, hardships, they were all destroyed, or they were not allowed to write. And as Fariburza said, they were not allowed. Education was out of limits, out of bounds for Zoroastrians. So there was no question of writing skills or anything of the sort. So over time, the Zoroastrians sought refuge in the outskirts of Iranian deserts and places like Golestan, Kerman. Establishing residencies in these areas kept the Zoroastrians out of the view of Islamic powers and thus gave them a sense of safety. And the reason that they chose Yazd and Kerman was because Yazd and Kerman are very close to deserts. So access to these people didn't want to have anything to do with the desert area. So the Zoroastrians found some refuge in those areas. Not complete refuge, not total freedom from persecution, but somewhat a little dissipated. So remaining inconspicuous was the only alternative the Zoroastrians had to survive. Hence they moved to Yazd and Kerman, both being on the outskirts of the great deserts, Dasht-e-Kavir and Dasht-e-Lut. Only camel caravans could pass through these areas. To reach any major cities such as Shiraz, Kerman, Isfahan was an 8-day journey, and it was full of peril, difficulties, discomfort, you name it. So Yazd remained insulated with the world on the other side of its mountains. Yazd has a lot of mountains, and I'll show you some pictures of that. Beautiful mountains. And so Yazd was insulated because of the mountains. They could keep towards the mountains and not have any intrusion from the other Iranian people. But even in this seclusion, regardless, there were erratic raids on the properties. There was definitely imposition of taxes and tyranny. That did not stop. Now, with Parsi travelers to Yazd and Kerman from India, recorded the plight of their Iranian brethren in the 18th and 19th centuries. So the information that we have, a lot of information comes from the Parsi travelers who went to Iran and gathered information and were really in shock as to what was happening. Next, okay. So here, this is just a map. This is Yazd is over here. Yazd is over. I hope you can see my cursor. Yazd is over here. This is Dasht-e-Kavi, the desert. Dasht-e-Lut. This is Kerman, Isfahan. So to travel to Shiraz and Isfahan from Yazd to Kerman, it was an 8-day journey. Not an easy task. So these are the desert areas, and the Yazd mountains are over here. This is a picture of two mountains, Barf Khane mountain. I guess Barf, I don't know Persian, but I guess Barf means snow or ice. So Barf Khane mountain is so beautiful. And this is Shirkuh mountain over here. It is the tallest mountain in Yazd. So this gives you an idea. So the Zoroastrians were somewhere over here. So the access to this area was kind of very limited. You had to be really adventurous to cross these high mountains. This is a place called Chak-Chak. Chak-Chak means a drip of water. I think that's what it means in Persian. Somebody can correct me. We have many Persian scholars over here. This is a Zoroastrian temple in Chak-Chak over here. I wish I could enlarge it, but I guess you can see this. So the mountains are over here. And so the access to these Zoroastrian enclaves was very difficult. This is another Zoroastrian temple, Pir-e-Naraki near Yazd. See the mountains again, the mountains are over here, mountains over here. So access to these dwellings would be very difficult. This is the village of Chak-Chak. It's supposed to be a pilgrimage site for Zoroastrians. I understand that whenever Parsis from India or wherever, US, Canada, wherever, if they have a tour to Iran, this is one of the must-see places. There's some legend with this. Banu, who was Yazdegerd III's second daughter, she sought refuge at Chak-Chak from the Arabs. When the Arabs invaded Iran, Persia, they all left, and Yazdegerd went to Merv, I believe. Banu, his daughter, came to Chak-Chak. Surrounded by, the legend goes that surrounded by enemies, she starts weeping and she prays to Ahura Mazda for help. Now, a myth states that a crack occurs in the mountain, her prayers were answered that way, and she disappears forever. She's saved. Now, the drip of water from the rocks is a metaphor for Banu's tears. Apparently, there's a lot of water dripping from the rocks, and the Chak-Chak fire temple is, the ground is always wet. Originally, Chak-Chak was a temple devoted to Anaita, the goddess, our Advisor Banu, as we call her. Oops, sorry. Okay, this is just another map. This is again Dasht-e-Kavi, Dasht-e-Lut. These are the mountains over here, Yazd mountains. So it gives you an idea. Now, in the 19th century Iran, the Zoroastrians of Yazd were artisans and manual laborers. They could not legally engage in professions that would bring them in contact with Muslims. They could not have any job that would bring them in the proximity of any of the Muslims. Now, Iranian peasants, Iranian farmers, traditionally, they dressed in blue. But the Zoroastrians could only wear garments of cotton or wool with a tight headgear to mark their lowly status. Young, attractive girls were abducted and sexually assaulted. And to avoid this, the women would make themselves unattractive. They would blacken their teeth and devise ways to look very kind of ugly when they were really beautiful. Under the Qajars, any semblance of civility was superficial. Now, the central Qajar government was kind of, oh, be nice to the non-Muslims, but the local governors were anything but nice. So the Zoroastrians faced excessive poverty. By the mid-19th century, there were only 7,000 Zoroastrians in Yazd and Kerman. Zoroastrian homes in years were single-story mud brick constructions with access roads that were so narrow and so twisted that any attackers were detracted. Zoroastrian homes were forbidden to have wind towers to cool their homes, the air conditioning of the day. Muslim homes could have these wind towers, but the Zoroastrians' home could not cool their homes. Zoroastrian religious practices could be conducted in their homes as long as you were out of sight of the Muslims. The Afghans decimated Zoroastrian homes when Zoroastrians supported an anti-Shia movement, anti-Shia Afghanis in 1722 Common Era. In this phase of excruciating poverty, the Zoroastrians in Yazd and Kerman were burdened with high rent by their landlords. That didn't stop. They were just harassed incessantly. They also had to endure cholera epidemics, high infant mortality, frequent robberies by nomads, and heavy land taxes. The jizya continued as it did from day one when the Arabs invaded Persia, and that did not stop. The taxation, if you're not a Muslim, you were taxed to the hilt. Zoroastrian independence was essentially wiped out with laws relegating them to the status of second-class citizens. Now, in the eyes of the Muslims, the Zoroastrians of Iran had no value, as reported by Maneckji, Limji, Hataria. And Saviours will talk about that. And actually, we have a Maneckji, Limji, Hataria scholar, expert on this panel, Dr. Zoroastrian. He's written a paper on Maneckji, Limji, Hataria, which I came across, and so very interesting. He's also written a paper on Charles Poston, which I'll talk about next time. But so thank you, Dr. Zoroastrian. Had no value, as reported by Maneckji, Limji, Hataria, who was a Parsi from India arriving in Persia in 1854. The Zoroastrians were murdered at whim. They were robbed, women raped, without the Muslims held accountable for any of their crimes and their offenses. While shopping, the Zoroastrians could not touch any food due to their quote-unquote unclean status. They could not go out in the rain, as they would pollute the rainwater. I mean, how upset can you be? They would pollute the rainwater if the rainwater touched their bodies. Jews were deemed less unclean, and they were thus intermediaries during the rain. So the Jews would, the Zoroastrians went shopping for apples, bananas, fruit, vegetables, whatever they went shopping for. They could not touch the items. The Jews would touch them and show them to the Zoroastrians, and then Zoroastrians either bought them or didn't buy them or whatever. So the Jews were the intermediaries. I mean, the height of absurdity is just staggering. The Zoroastrians could not use facilities such as barber shops, water fountains, bathhouses, and tea houses that the Muslims frequented. A Zoroastrian riding on a donkey, you could not ride, Zoroastrians could not ride a horse. They could only ride donkeys. And if they came across somebody, even a young girl, a young person, a 10-year-old kid walking towards them, they had to dismount the donkey and walk. Regardless of the age, they had to suffer this humiliation. If a Zoroastrian's garment inadvertently touched a Muslim, the Zoroastrian was severely beaten. Forced conversions to Islam, burning Zoroastrian books, desecrating the temples was rampant during the Qajar and earlier rules. Even the Dakmas were desecrated. Zoroastrian girls were abducted and then forcefully converted to Islam and married off to Muslims. The harassment was more a show of power. Abuse of the weak under a powerful but an ignorant leadership is a sad part of human history. Now we come to an area where the atrocities that the Zoroastrians suffered is kind of little bit dissipated, minimized. It did not completely eliminate, but they were just kind of a little bit minimized. Kaikashar Shahrukh was an Iranian Zoroastrian reformist, and he rallied for the rights of the minorities, for the non-Muslims in Iran. He was the Zoroastrian representative of the Majlis. Majlis was a legislative body, which we talked about earlier. And so he was appointed a representative for the Zoroastrians from 1909 to 1940. Unsullied understanding of Zoroastrian's profound messages was on the decline. People were not being able to keep up with the real message that Zoroastrian had left for his followers. Among the Zoroastrians who had sought refuge in India, that is particularly the Indian Parsis, they were losing their knowledge, understanding of what Zoroaster had taught. Not even the priests could explain to the laity the purpose behind the rituals, beliefs, practices, and such. So they compile, the Parsis of India, they compile a catalog of questions on matters of religion for the Zoroastrian priesthood back in Iran. These exchanges between the two Zoroastrian populations came to be known as riwayats. The last riwayat was exchanged in 1768 and was known as Ithote, which is Gujarati for 78. The riwayats also served another purpose. They maintained ties between the Zoroastrians of India and the Zoroastrians of Persia. An Iranian Zoroastrian family managed to escape to India, forming their Indian brethren of the atrocities suffered by the Iranian fellow Zoroastrians. So this is an interesting story. So there was a Zoroastrian called Kaikhasro Yazdyar, and he fled Kerman, landing in Yazd with a very attractive daughter, Golestan. In Yazd, unfortunately, a Muslim started getting romantic ideas for this young woman, for Golestan, and he made her an object of his desire. The father was scared, he was petrified. So to avoid abduction, father and daughter escaped to Bombay in 1796. Now, in those days, Zoroastrians were forbidden to travel. Forget about traveling within their own country, but to go to a foreign country, out of the question, no way. But somehow Yazdyar, Khosrow Yazdyar and Golestan managed to escape, and they landed in Bombay in 1796. In Bombay, Golestan married a Parsi Faramji Vikhaji Pandey. Golestan and her father informed their Indian brethren of what the Zoroastrians in Iran were going through, what they had to endure, and the humiliation, the suffering, the persecution. No, just so they were able to communicate that to the Parsis in India. Now, Golestan urged her husband, Faramji Vikhaji Pandey, to help the Zoroastrians back in Iran. So Faramji with his sons Barjoji and Mirwanji established funds to aid the Iranian Zoroastrians, and they founded a society called the Society for the Amelioration of Zoroastrians in Persia. This society was a boon for the Iranian Zoroastrians in many ways. Now, Maneckji, Limji, and Fairuz will talk more in detail about him. This is just to give you a flavor. So Maneckji Limji Hataria was the first emissary of the society, and he arrived in Persia in 1854. Maneckji tirelessly worked in Yazd, Kerman, and Tehran for the spiritual and physical welfare of the Iranian Zoroastrian communities. Maneckji expended all his energies to have the jizya tax repealed. So he made an appointment to see Nasser al-Din Shah Qajar, and he persuaded the Shah to lower the tax, if not to abolish it. And he was successful. The tax was lowered. Maneckji was relentless in alleviating the distress of the Iranian Zoroastrians. He furnished food, clothing, medicine to the old and the sick. He arranged marriages for young girls, young women, vulnerable to Muslim harassment. Hataria established schools for Zoroastrians in Tehran, Yazd, Kerman, at a time when education for Zoroastrians was forbidden. And what he did was he encouraged Zoroastrians from India, Parsis from India, to come to Iran and teach at these schools. So he gave them the positions of tutors, teachers. Zoroastrians had no security before Maneckji's arrival. Even with all his efforts and success, security was precarious until the Pahlavi dynasty came to power in 1925. And this is just a picture. You've all seen this. This is a very common picture of a Zoroastrian temple in Yazd. So with that, my portion is concluded. And Fairuz, please take over.
Thank you, Maria. Before I start, I would like to go back and give you some information which we have missed. And that is about Yazdgerd. Yazdgerd was born in 624 CE. That means he became king at the age of 8. He was just 8 years old when he became king. And when the war of Qadisiyah took place, he was just a child of 12. So one of the reasons that we lost to the Arabs was the age of the king. He was a 12-year-old child who was a king. And when Rustam got killed, means there was nobody. The army just melted away because the king was a 12-year-old child and there was no real leader after Rustam. Yazgi died when he was just 27 years old. So I just wanted to give you this information. This is one of the reasons of our downfall. And now we will go to the saviors of Zoroastrians of Iran. For the first 1200 years, we had suffering and suffering and suffering, and there was only those freedom fighters that we talked about. And in the end, we Zoroastrians ended up in Yazd. The villages in Yazd, if you have a look at it, they are about, everyone speaks a different dialect of the same language, which shows they have come from different parts of Iran. Wherever they were sort of suffering and they had heard about Yazd, and they moved to Yazd. And in the end, it was some of the people from Khorasan and from the Caspian Sea area were also brought by the king to Isfahan. In Isfahan, they were put in ghettos where a lot of them died, but those who survived fled to Yazd because they knew the Zoroastrians in Yazd. So the villages that we have in Yazd, they are the survivors from the entire country, entire empire. And each village is very particular. You'll see the difference in the dialect. They're speaking Dari, but they speak in a different dialect, and that shows they're from different parts of Iran. Now, when Islam came, the women in Iran after the Islamic invasion were the worst affected. Men were beheaded, and that's finished, no more suffering. But women were taken to the slave markets of Mecca and Medina and sold as slaves. After the Islamization of Iran, the Iranians whose ancestors had by force converted to Islam, after a few generations knew very little about the history and acted according to the holy instructions of the Quran. Zoroastrian women were abducted and married to the Muslims, for it took the Muslim a step closer to heaven. Now, we had a gentleman by the name of Khosrow Yazdyar, who was in Kerman. And when Karim Khan Zand died, there was turmoil in the country, and Zoroastrians in Kerman were in trouble. So he was one of the persons who fled Kerman and came to Yazd because it was more safe in Yazd. There he gets married, and he has a daughter, beautiful daughter by the name of Golestan. Very soon, Golestan's beauty was noticed by the Muslims, who considered it a sin to let a beautiful girl remain as Artoshti. In 1796, Khosrow once again fled, this time with his young daughter Golestan, to Bombay. And here our story of the saviors start. They were given refuge by Adalji Dorabji Lashkari. Later on, Khosrow goes back to Iran 3 times, and every time he gets members of his family, and finally, after 3 trips, all of his family is in Bombay. As Maria said, it was difficult to travel. You are not allowed to travel. You didn't have to ride on a donkey, forget any other horse or anything. And it was difficult to travel, but he made 3 trips and got his entire family back in Bombay. Now, Golestan married Faramji Bikhaji Pandey. And by the way, the Pandey family, we have Roshan Rivetna, who is from the Pandey family in North America. So, Faramji marries Golestan. Now, there's an interesting story about the Faramji family. They had previously given refuge to a girl by the name of Firuze. Now, this Firuze, her parents were forced to become Muslims, and they did not want their daughters ending up marrying a Muslim. And they were making effort to see how they can send them to India. Finally, a German traveler comes over there and they stay with the family, and he falls in love with the elder daughter of this family. So the father makes an arrangement with the German traveler that he's welcome to marry his daughter. It's better than becoming a Muslim. And he should take Firuze to Bombay and hand him over to some Parsi over there. Which this German traveler does. He brings Firuze, and Faramji Bikhaji Pandey adopts this Firuze, and later she is married to a Parsi soldier who was in charge of taking care of Bombay. The presidency of Bombay, he was the person who used to take care of it from the police point of view. So that was the story of the Pandey family. Now, Golestan Banu and Faramji had 5 sons and 4 daughters, total 9 children. Golestan instigated all the children, their affiliation to Iran and the Zartushtis in Iran. Shikar Bai was one of her daughters that married Sir Dinsha Petit. In 1834, the eldest son, Barjorji Faramji Pandey, he started a fund for the Iranians who had come and taken refuge, like herself, a mother and all. They used to come over there, they had nothing. So he had set up a fund to help them settle down in life. Then her third son, Merwanji Faramji Pandey, started the second fund in 1854 for those in Iran. And there starts a story of Maneckji. After setting up that fund, they looked for somebody who would be able to go to Iran and see what's the condition of the Iranian Zartushtis. And Maneckji at that time was a very able candidate. He had spent his time from the age of 15. He was working for the British Army as a bookkeeper and accountant, Sandukdar they call it. And he was very able. He was from Iran. He had his family had migrated during the Safavid period, somewhere in the 1700s. And he had always that desire to go to Iran. So even when he was working with the army, he was hoping that one day the army would take him to Iran. They went up to Afghanistan, and it was in Afghanistan that he retired from that job. They finished their assignment over there, and they were coming back. He said, "No, I'm not coming back. I will stop here," and he resigned. From that day onward, he started a business and still hoping to travel because of the business to Iran. And finally ended up being a candidate for going to Iran to see what the condition of Iranians are. In March 1854, he reached Yazd Kerman, and he found the condition of the Zartushtis there was in a dire state. He realized that the jizya tax, the infidel tax, had the community at the mercy of the tax collector and the governor. They were forbidden to learn to read and write except for the mubets. They were not allowed to repair the fire temples. So when he saw all this, the first thing that he did was he got permission. And mind you, because he was a British passport holder, he had extra sort of support from the British in Iran. And in Iran, the British embassy was very strong. So he managed to get permission, and the Atish Behram, which was in ruins, he repaired it in 1855. The board still says that it was repaired in 1855. And then he saw that the dakhme was not proper, so he repaired it and later on built another dakhme on the hill adjacent to that hill. Then he saw that children are not allowed to go to school, so he tried to get that permission. He managed to get permission to let the boys and girls go to school. And in 1870, the ban was lifted. So 54, and this is 1870. He had to work that many years to be able to get the permission. And then he set up schools. He set up school in every village. And he set up school in the town. So primary schools were in every village at a primary school. He brought some teachers from India. The Parsis from India came as teachers and they taught these children in the high school, primary school. The teachers, basically the villagers were taught and the villagers then taught the children. So they had a couple of teachers in every village who had gone, basically learned from the Parsis who had come as teachers for the high school. He was very friendly with the ambassador of Britain, France, and the USA, and they helped him a lot. At that time, a lot of atrocities were committed, and he wanted to sort of bring an end to that. So once when a Zoroastrian was murdered and the governor could not do anything about it because the mullahs were more powerful than the governor. The governor represented the king, but the mullahs represented the people, or rather had control over the people. So he convinces the governor to let him take this murderer to Tehran and demand justice. The governor agrees. That's a long journey, going from Yaz to Tehran through the desert, and it was a 7-8 day journey on donkey and horses and all that. He could go on horses, so he went with horses, and he had a police officer with him because the culprit belonged to the government, so the police had to go with him, which was good. And when he goes to the court in Tehran, finally the judgment is that he's paid, the family is paid 10 tomans as blood money. Compare that to a Muslim being murdered, which is 1,000 tomans. So 1%. A Zoroastrian life was valued at 1% of what a Muslim life minimum was valued at. So basically he learned his lesson that it was useless even going to Tehran. The laws were religious laws and nobody could help in that regard. So his effort was to abolish the jizya. The jizya was a very sort of jizya was designed to subdue. The Quran wants them to subdue the non-Muslims. The people of the book had to be subdued. The people who did not have books were to be killed or made Muslims. They had two choices. But the people of the book had the choice of paying the jizya. And we were sort of initially, because our numbers were high, we were called people of the book. But then afterwards they said, you don't have any book. And that is why later on we see how our Mubeds and other scholars and whoever was there tried to design the religion in such a way that we match with the Muslims. And that's why religion has become Abrahamic today. It was an effort, all because we wanted to survive. It was for the survival of the person, not the religion. It was for the survival of the person. Anyways, the abolition took 25 years. He started in the middle of 1857, and in 1882, he was able to abolish it. Now, how did it all happen? Maneckji was basically here to convince the Shah to go against the dictates of the Quran, because the Quran, as I said jizya is to subdue the believers of other religion. So he had, as I said, the support of the British, and he finally managed to get an interview with the Shah. The British ambassador in Tehran influenced the Shah to have him accept him to go and meet him. When he goes to the meeting, the ambassador is not allowed to go in. Only Hataria goes in. I have given a full description of the interview which he had in the reading material. You can read it. It's very interesting. Now, the important point is here. When Hataria was asked to give the dictates, to explain the dictates of Zoroastrian religion, what is the Zoroastrian religion? Hataria's response is, the main directives are similar to the Shariat of Islam. There is some difference in the prayers, but the essence, both are the same. This is what I was pointing out to all the time, that what has happened to Zoroastrian religion during the Islamic period is this. Even Hataria has to say this, that it is exactly like the Muslim religion. There's no difference, only the prayers are different. So after this meeting, the Shah reduces the jizya by 100 tumans. Now, in those days, tuman was a big sum. It was, they had sha'i, and then they had riyal, and then they had tuman. So people were paid in sha'is, not even in riyals. And then to have a tuman it was a big amount. Anyways, they were paying 920 tumans at that time. The whole community in Yazd and Kerman was paying 920. So the Shah reduces that by 100 tumans. But what is important is this, that 920 goes to the treasury of the Shah. But the governor, the tax collector, the mullahs, they all have a share which doesn't come from this 920. So they collect, if nothing, at least another 920 or 1,000 before they give this amount to the Shah. So that 100 tumans makes it 820, so to say. Then after a lot of pleading through contacts with the ambassador, British ambassador Ravelson and the French ambassador, Maneckji obtained an agreement for the entire amount to be remitted from Bombay directly to the treasurer of the king in Tehran. So if he could pay directly and the tax collector wouldn't go to the Zoroastrians to collect this money, what would happen is that would save them paying the extra to the tax collector and the governor. But for 2 years after the Shah agreed, and he sent out a proclamation that no more collection of tax from the Zoroastrians, it will be paid directly to me by the Parsis from Bombay. So still 2 years after that, they collected the money because they wanted their share. Anyways, on repeated request, the Shah had to instruct and send a notice that if anyone collects, it is going against the law and that they will be punished. And that ended that portion. And now the tax was paid directly from Bombay to the treasury in Tehran. And that was a real saving point for the people in Yazd and Kerman. But the abolition of it was still far away. So once when the king, Nasiruddin Shah, goes to London, the Parsis over there were ready for it. They were waiting for the news, and when they heard about it, they got the people they knew over there to get them an interview with the Shah. They met the Shah at Buckingham Palace. The people that met him were Naurozji Faridun, Dadabhai Naurozji, Ardeshir Khurshedji Wadia, and Rustamji Kawasji Bahadurji. These four people went to Buckingham Palace and met the Shah, talked with him, gave him very so gold and silver and writings and poetries and things of that sort written in gold, and sort of obliged him to impress him. And he agreed. He agreed that he would abolish. And if, of course, the British put pressure. Now he's in the Buckingham Palace, and they put pressure on him and made him accept it. He accepted it. He even gave it in writing that he will work on abolition of the jizya. But when he goes back to Tehran, there is a mullah that will not accept, and he had to keep quiet. So a few years of again writing and letters and talking about it doesn't help. So Maneckji requested Sir Dinsha Pitit. Now, who was Dinsha Pitit as far as the relationship is concerned? She was the husband of Shikar Bai. And who was Shikar Bai? The daughter of Golestan Banu. So one of the daughters of Golestan Banu had married Dinsha Pitit. And so Maneckji goes and requests Dinsha Pitit, who talks to the Viceroy of India to apply diplomatic pressure on the Qajars. The Viceroy obliged because of the growing political influence of the Parsis in India. On instruction of the Viceroy, the English ambassador to Tehran, Ronald F. Thompson, raised the matter of the Zoroastrian ply with the Shah. So extra pressure was now applied, and it gave result. Finally, it was abolished on the commencement of the year 1882. On 21st of March 1882, the jizya was officially abolished. At that time, they were paying Bombay was paying 845 tomans. From the 820, which they used to pay, it's a $25 toman more. Inflation, so to say, had increased the numbers. In the 23 years that the funds were paid from Bombay, they paid 1 lakh, close to 1,10,000 rupees was contributed towards jizya directly from Bombay. Now a little about Maneckji. Maneckji, as I said, he was from Iran. He lived in Surat. He married over there to a lady called Hirabai. And when he came to Iran, he was paid a salary from the society. But he stopped taking that salary in 1868. So he took salary for 14 years. He died in Iran, but for 14 years he was salaried, and he took salary. After that, he did not take salary. He said, I would rather have that money spent on the work that I'm doing than taking salary, because I'm making money over here. I'm doing some business and I don't need the salary. His other interests were, he made a dictionary where he removed the Arabic words from the Persian language, which is still going on. So he created a dictionary, so to say, where there were no Arabic words. And there's an interesting thing over here. He was very much in contact with the thinkers and religious people of the time. And he was in touch with a historian and free thinker by the name of Jalaluddin Mirza. And who was he? He was the 55th son of Fatali Shah. Now imagine this, the Shah had 55, more than 55 children. And he was the 55th son of Fatali Shah. He was, of course, a historian and free thinker, and Maneckji Limji Hataria was friends with him. He came in touch with many religious movements at that time, and there were a lot of religion movements going on, especially the Sufis. And he was with the Nematullahi order of the Sufis. And they bestowed on Maneckji the Sufi title of Darwish-e-Fani. Darwish-e-Fani means transitory Darwish. And there are a lot of things that Maneckji has written, and they're very philosophic, and he knew Zoroastrianism, and he sort of gave the true picture and discussed with these people, and that's why they were all, he was among the elite. He also had contact with Mirza Fateh Ali Akhundzadeh. Now, who was this? This was a person who said that religion was believing in superstition. Now imagine at that time, during the Islamic heat of Islam, this Mirza Fateh Ali Akhundzadeh in Iran used to say that religion is believing in superstition. Maneckji also had communication with Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i prophet, so to say, and the letters that he has written and communicated with Baha'u'llah are today studied by the Baha'is. That's a letter that is always discussed because it was in the prime of the Baha'i religion, and Maneckji discussed religious matters with him. And even today they are studying it. Then he helped in collecting many manuscripts, Zoroastrian manuscripts, that finally ended up in the library of Dastur Jamaspi Maneckji Jamaswasa, who has officially thanked him, and his letter of thank is there in the library. Maneckji also wrote a few books and edited some written by others. Unfortunately, Hirabai, his wife, died in India, and Maneckji married an Iranian Zoroastrian from Kerman, whose name is Farangiz Hormazyar Khosrow Bandar. And thereby he assimilated into the local community. She died in 1889, and Maneckji died in 1890 at the age of 77. He lived for 7 years after the abolition of the jizya tax. The memory of Maneckji Limji Hataria and his work is remembered today by the Zoroastrians of Iran. A bust of him is displayed in the fire temple in Yazd, the fire temple that you saw just now. There are two sections to this fire temple. The front is where the Zoroastrians go and pray. And there's a bust of Maneckji over there, and every Zoroastrian that goes in touches the, so to say, that statue and pays homage to him. And then the other side of this, the front side that we see the picture in the picture, there's a big glass panel, and this is for tourists and non-Zoroastrians to come and have a visit, because it's one of the heritage sites, and it's open to tourists. So behind the glass, people come and have a look at the fire which is burning on the other side, and if somebody's praying, they can see a little bit of it. Now, the French ambassador has, what the French ambassador said is interesting. He has said there was needed nothing short of a miracle to save the Zoroastrians in Iran. Maneckji Limji Hataria performed that miracle. So it was really a miracle that he was able to make the Shah go against the Quran. Basically, the Shah went against the Quran. And I think the British were very helpful in that. Now, the report that Maneckji was sending to India did not just go waste. It instigated Pashutanji Dosabai Markar, or Pestanji Markar, as he is called. He came to read, he was younger, and he came to read about what's happening in Iran. He was initially working in a law firm, and then later on he had started his own business. He had earned good money, and he was using his money in his village in Surat to build schools for children and educating the Parsis over there. When he read all this, he got disturbed, and that they were so badly persecuted. And he was a believer that education was the mean of uplifting the downtrodden. So he decided to open an educational institution in Yazd. He sent money and visited quite a number of times. They bought a huge plot of land. It is still there, a very big plot of land, and today it's in the middle of the city. Of course, the school had an orphanage, a school for the boys, a school for the girls in that plot, which is still there, but it's no longer a school, because if it was a school, the property would go to the government. So it's no longer a school. It's now, today it's a museum. It's a museum of Zoroastrian effects over there, and the rest of the land is there. Part of the land was taken over by the government after the revolution. And when, after a lot of complaint and a lot of efforts, they gave another plot of land of equal square footage outside the city, in the outskirts of the city. And they made it into a park and called it the Markar Park. But last time when I went over there and I saw, it was no longer, it's become part of the city. When they gave it, it was outside the city, but now it's become, the city has expanded, it's part of the city. And it is no longer called Markar Park, it is called City Park, Porkeshar. Before it was called Porkeshar Markar, now they have removed the Markar word, and that is gone. I talked to the Anjuman and I said, what are you guys doing about it? He said, we are always complaining, but nobody's there to listen to us and we can't do anything. At least it's still there. We'll do something about it when there are better times. So this is the story of the saviors of the Zoroastrian in the 19th century. Maneckji's jizya tax abolishment was the greatest thing that happened and saved the community. Otherwise, it would have finished the 7,711 that were left when Maneckji came and counted them. Maneckji has reported exactly 6,500 something in Yazd, so many in Kerman, so many in Shiraz, so many. The total is 7,711 Zartushtis living in the entire country of Iran in 1854. I end there, and if you have questions, we are ready to take it.
Can we first do a short quiz, and then we can go to questions, because there are some questions also in the chat box. So let's just start with it. I just have about 6 questions that Saviours and I have put together, and they're short, and we would like to have everyone participate if you can, please. Okay, first one, very simple. Which tribe came to power after the dynasty fall of the Safavid dynasty? Which followed this tribal rule? You can raise your hand or you can jump in.
Hotak dynasty came after the Safavid dynasty.
Yes, correct. The Afghan. Yes, correct. You're right. You're right. And then which dynasty followed the Afghan, the Hotak dynasty?
Afshar dynasty.
Zan dynasty. Yeah, actually Zan dynasty. It's okay.
But wasn't there an Afshar dynasty before the Zan dynasty?
Did I have that?
They were the same. Basically, there are two names for it.
Okay, because that is what I read in the notes.
Yeah.
Hoshang, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, in the notes, it's Afsharid was before Zand. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But then my mistake. Sorry. Okay. Next question. Which country was exerting its influence on the Qajar dynasty, on the Qajars, and how did the Qajars react?
Russia.
Yes, that's right. And what was the reaction of the Qajars? What did they try to accomplish? They formed the Majlis, the legislative body, to make sure that the powers are not completely 100% vested in the monarchy, but that there's a legislative body which would make rules and dispense justice and what have you.
Right.
And can I add something over here? During this period, the Russian took away a lot of land from the Iranians. There are 2-3 contracts signed between, which are very famous and which are always part of the complaint of the Iranian people, that during the Qajar period, just like in Ukraine, they took away a lot of land from us.
Okay. Where did the Zoroastrians seek refuge from persecution and why? Go ahead, Hoshang.
Yeah, in Yazd and Kerman, because they were like semi-desert areas, and at that time they must be uninhabitable. So they fled to these paths to save themselves and the religions, and not away from persecution. They
Right.
had to flee.
Yeah. So they were kind of isolated. There were mountains, deserts, and mountains.
Yeah.
So where they lived was not easily accessible.
Yeah.
But that's why they chose that place. You're right. What was the fate of Zoroastrian women in the 19th century Iran, and how did they fend off their distress? Someone else besides Hoshang and Keki and
They were abducted, converted to Islam, married off to Muslims.
right.
They tried to avert that by disguising themselves as being ugly.
Right. Correct answer. Okay. How was the Society for the Amelioration of Zoroastrians in Persia established? What was its function? I think Fariborz and I both covered that, so it should be fresh in your minds.
The sons of Pandey started this amelioration society, and one was the fund for the Zoroastrians who came into Bombay or India, funds for them to settle down, and the other fund was created in Iran to help them.
Help them. Correct. So the idea was to help the Zoroastrians more in Iran. Because they were the ones who were really badly persecuted. So they had to be saved and they had to be helped. So that was the reason. And Golestan, that Fariborz mentioned and even I mentioned, she was the one who got her husband and his son and their sons to start this campaign to help the Zoroastrians in Iran. Correct. Last question. Who was Maneckji Limji Hataria and what role did he play in Iran? And Fariborz did a lengthy, very good, detailed discussion on that. So,
Yeah.
Okay, Hoshang, go ahead.
Yeah. Maneckji Limji Hataria was the first scholar from the Society of Amelioration of the Zoroastrians in Iran. So he visited Iran many times. He was given the task to uplift the conditions, and he was very successful in ultimately getting rid of the jizya tax, which was a very heavy tax burden on the Zoroastrians at that time living in Yazd and Kerman. And he also later on set up schools, because Zoroastrians were not allowed to get education. So he set up schools, got all the permissions, set up schools. So that helped Zoroastrians come up in life.
Correct. Very good answer.
Otherwise, their conditions were very, very bad.
Yeah, thank you. Very nice. Karishma, you have something to?
I just wanted to ask a question. It was not mentioned about Limji's work on setting up anjumans in Iran, a sort of community bodies, because as I've heard, that was very important to help the local people. I just wanted to know if you would comment on that, just giving some structure to the Iranian society, the Zoroastrian Iranian society.
Actually, the anjumans, you're right, the anjumans were set up, but I'm not sure how influential Hataria was in that respect. He may have done one or two, but actually we will talk about that next time. The anjumans were set up by the Iranian Zoroastrians to help their own communities. That was the idea. So the anjumans were set up. You're right in that.
I mean, Maneckji got the permit from Nasruddin Shah to establish the anjuman. You couldn't just go and establish the anjuman like now, right?
Right.
You had to have an official endorsement from the government. And
That's why I don't think Hataria was very successful in doing that.
He was. He got the
He was.
permission for the
Okay, all right. You were
Kerman
okay.
and Yazd Anjuman, and that's they're called Anjuman Nasari. Nasari meaning after Nasruddin Shah.
Okay.
Nasruddin Shah renewed the permit twice. His son Muzaffar renewed it one more time. Then it came time of Reza Shah, and then we didn't need to get permit from the royal. We could just go to the local governor's office and renew.
All right.
That was critical because they were recognized by the governor as an official body. That was critical. Yes, Krishna, you're right. Krishna.
Thank you. Okay.
There were anjumans before, but they were not recognized. Every village had its anjuman, but they were not recognized. Maneckji helped to get the permission and recognize them officially. That was important.
Freddie?
Yes, I read somewhere that Maneckji asked his son to come and help him in Iran, but after he landed, he was assassinated or something. And
No. He was there from the beginning. He went with his son. He had this one son and he took him with him to Iran and he helped him in Iran. He is very low-key. But after his death, he worked with him all the time. After Maneckji died, he was killed in Bandar Abbas. I have it in my reading material. Okay. After he died, a year or so after he died, he was killed in Bandar Abbas because at that time there were a lot of thugs on the way. Okay. You wanted to travel, you were looted. Maneckji always went fully armed. If you see his portrait that he has got painted and it's in the reading material, you see how well armed he is, even in the portrait.
Yeah.
So traveling at that time was difficult, and Maneckji's son gets murdered, not because he was artistic, but because he was traveling.
Another story I heard was that actually Maneckji protected the dakhmas because the people would come and destroy the dakhmas by sitting outside with a gun in his hand to if anyone wanted to come and destroy the dakhma.
No, these are stories. You couldn't kill a Muslim. If you would kill a Muslim, you will be in trouble.
Right.
But he did build a new one because the other one was depleted and people could go in and all that. So he built a new one, taller one. It is still there, and it is called Maneckji's Dakhma.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go to the chat questions. Karishma started saying that, thank you for helping me understand, thank you for helping me grow further respect for the Zoroastrians of the time. My mother had taught me some of this when I was a child. Hearing this in a structured course is so helpful. Much gratitude. Thank you. So next, Delphina question. What made Yazd safer than Kerman or other cities for the Zoroastrians? Because of the desert that we mentioned earlier and the mountains, access to those places was difficult. Not that it was impossible, but it was difficult. And then you follow up with that, Delphina follows up with this. If travel was so difficult, then how did the Zoroastrians escape? What did they use to escape? I don't know for sure, but I can tell you from a more of a psychological point of view that when you're distressed, you will find a way and solve your problem. So they must have done something innovative. Exactly what they did, I don't know. Maybe Saviours or Dr. Zoroastrian can answer that.
Yeah, their wits, their ability to outthink the crooks, how to get, to
their wits.
around.
Yeah. You start exactly. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
And Yaz was better than Kerman because Kerman was close to Afghanistan. And twice when they got attacked by the Afghans invaded Iran, they killed a lot of Zoroastrians. Zoroastrians were outside the fort. So they had no protection and they were the first to get killed. And the ones that survived were the ones that went into the Qanat, in the underground tunnels where water used to come. Those who went in there were the ones that survived. The rest all got killed. So it was a massacre. Yaz was a little further away from Afghanistan. It was even Genghis Khan Temur did not travel to Yaz. He had an option of going through Yaz, but he doesn't go, and he goes to Shiraz, not from Yaz, but he goes from the outside. So Yaz had an advantage compared to Kerman. And that's why we had 6,500 Zartushtis in Yaz and less than 450 in Kerman when Maneckji Hataria came to Iran.
Okay, Maruk has a question. She's raised her hand. Maruk, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I'm just curious, when did Zoroastrians first start their migration to India? And then I also have a follow-up.
They came, they've come from right from
in the 8th century. They
started
8th century. They started migrating. So this was more in the Umayyad Abbasid Caliphate time period. That's when they started. They couldn't endure, they couldn't bear the persecution, basically. And so a small people just said, okay, we'll go somewhere else. We can't put up with this.
And they came in waves to India.
They came in waves, yes.
Yeah. They didn't come all together. And I read somewhere very recently that there were about 45,000, less than 50,000 Parsis in India, not the 100,000 that we always think. There were less than 50, 44, 48,000 Parsis in India at one point when that particular note was written. And afterwards, we must have grown to the 100,000 that we talk of.
Okay.
So I have a follow-up, or I can wait.
Go ahead.
The riwayats, it is my understanding that they were written, they sent people to Iran to learn about our religion, and that's the riwayats, right? Writing down about our religious practices. So they brought it back to India. It is my understanding that that's how we started following our practices in India, based upon
Not quite. We didn't fully. We did not 100% take what they were saying. We created our own.
Yes. So that was exactly my question, follow-up question. That when did all the Hindu practices get inserted into our rituals and practices?
Let me say this.
Difference, right? We see a difference, right? The way we practice our religion back in India as Parsis compared to the Zoroastrians that are coming in from Iran. So I want to know, when did that occur? Why did we feel it was necessary?
I don't think there's we can give a time period exactly. I don't know, somebody else can, but there's no time period that happened in 1902. No, nothing like that. What happened was actually over time, both populations, the Iranian Zoroastrians and the Parsis in India, we had to adapt to the local climate. we had to be accepted. So we took on some Hindu, for example, the tikka. There's no tikka in the Zoroastrian religion. We don't have carry coconut on our weddings or no, but we do. It's a kind of more of a Hindu tradition. Same thing, there are traditions that the Iranian Zoroastrians follow, which seems strange to us from India, but that's because they had to adapt to the Muslim climate. So it's kind of
the Sej Supara that we have in India, they don't have the Sej Supara. They have a sugar thing made covered in green so wrapping is the Supara. So there's some changes. And if you go and read the rivayats, they are 90% concerned with the Vandidad. There's nothing about the Gathas, there's nothing about the philosophy of the religion. It is what happens if somebody dies and he has property, what should we do? If this has happened, it's all about, at least the much I read, I just brushed through it. I didn't want to waste time reading all of it. When I brushed through it, it was 90% Vandidad. And don't forget this, the first manuscript that we found, the oldest manuscript that we found is the Vandidad manuscript. And that is the one that was translated first in 1700. That was the manuscript that was translated. So Vandidad gained prominence in India. And that's why it's so important, because when they started with the first manuscript, they were, oh God, this is it. We found it. And when you say the difference between Parsis and Iranians, apart from that difference, which was just mentioned, Iranians are open to change. Even today, they are changing. If you find Irani Mubed, even over here in North America, he will finish a prayer in half an hour for a ceremony. The same ceremony, a Parsi Dastur will be doing it for an hour and a half. In Iran, the Mubed Council has come to a conclusion that you have to reduce. People have no time and they don't want to sit and listen to this prayer. So they have given permission and they have designed it. And Mubed Mehrawan Firuzgari is one of them who is helping in that. They have reduced the prayers. So the Mubed is not supposed to pray 2 hours or 1.5 hours for any function. They finish it fast. And instead they talk. And this was started by the late Mubed, the name slipped. He was the one that when he used to come to the Porse, that's the death ceremony, he used to speak more than prayers. And everybody would come to listen to him. Everyone would come to listen to him to see when every time somebody died, he had something different to tell. And his speeches are there on the internet. They're in Farsi, of course, but they are just revolutionary. And this was just, he died after the revolution, in the middle of the revolution. He was the one that saved the Iranian flag today. The mullahs wanted to change the flag, and he stood up, and he was part of the council of that was changing things. And he stood up and explained what the flag means, and the flag was saved, except that the lion and the sun was removed, and Allah was put on it. But the color of the flag was saved by him.
Karishma had a question.
Sorry, I remember the name. It was Shahzadi. Mubed Shahzadi.
Rostam Shahzadi.
Rostam Shahzadi, yeah.
Karishma, you had a question? You want to raise your hand?
I thought better of asking it, but now that you've asked me, I will ask it, Maria. Thank you. And that it's more of comment, and that is somewhere in the comparison between the words of Dari and Farsi and the words of Avesta may lie some of the traditions that I feel may be lost. Because even in Iran, my observation is that which the Mobbeds may be giving out may be influenced by Islam, or how to protect the faith against the change. So we call it adaptation. Similarly, in India, maybe this change has taken place. So how do we go back to where the essence of the philosophy of Zarathustra and the practice of the Zoroastrian faith lies?
You cannot go back.
I'm giving that talk next week. The evolution of Zoroastrianism. It's up on the site. You can read it, and we'll talk about it. See, what you say is right. There is a lot of adaptation both in India and Iran with the majority, like the dakhma in Iran is no more in use. We bury our death. In India, it's a big fight. You don't want to bury, you don't want to burn, but we bury. Now, when we have come to North America, the Parsis usually, at least here in Vancouver, they all cremate. But that's a Hindu influence. But the Iranian Zartushtras in North America, 99% go for burial, 1% go for cremation. So there is influence. But what I am talking about is, apart from the influence and apart from all that has happened, now in India, we are, so to say, more orthodox than we are in Iran. There can be no one more orthodox than the priest, right? And the priests in Iran are ready to bring the sort of time on prayers to a minimum. They are okay with deleting some prayers and making them shorter and all that. And that's the difference between, that has nothing to do with Islam or with Hinduism. This is something which they're deciding to do.
Karishma?
Mute.
It's Karishma's mummy.
Yes,
Gary.
hello. Hi.
Hello. I wanted to just pass a remark that we are not supposed to defile the earth. Earth is part of nature. We are not supposed to defile anything that is the element of nature. Then why are we burying people? Because we are defiling the earth, we are ruining that space. That space could be used for growing trees. That space could be used for many other things, growing food. Why are we defiling the earth by burying people? It is better to cremate, isn't it?
I would tend to agree with you. What you're saying, Jaranti. It's you made a very good point. But just to give you some historical perspective, actually, in the Zoroastrian faith, burial was the way to dispose bodies till much later. But the way it was done was, and this is in Dasudhara's book. So, and the way it was done was that the body was wrapped in wax. So that way, the body did not touch the earth. As you pointed out, we cannot defile the earth. So yes, the earth, and you're absolutely right, the earth is more important for housing, agriculture, for human needs. Absolutely correct. And so it's not a bad practice. But then the question that I have is, what do you do in a place where there are no dakhmas? What would happen in America, in Canada, in England, when we are going to kick the bucket?
Now you have microwave. You can cremate with microwave.
Yeah. Okay. All right. No, I'm all for that. I'm not. I'm just saying, giving you a kind of an answer that you kind of are seeking.
I think we are deviating from the topic.
Yeah.
And also, Jaranti, we are going to have a discussion group event on that very important topic. You have raised a very, very important topic, and I think that's something that we are going to take up in the future. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for bringing it up.
Okay, Maruk, you have a comment, question?
I always like to take history and then bring it to the modern day, as I did the last session. because there's no point in studying history if you don't bring it to our modern day lives.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
And people always talk about this business of conversion, and do we convert and do we not convert? And I can see the psychology of the Iranian people versus the psychology of the Indian people. The Indian Parsis, how did we survive? We survived by isolating ourselves, didn't we? That way, nobody came into Yazd, nobody came into Karman. So therefore, the psychology of the Indian Parsis has become that if we want to survive, we have to isolate ourselves. Whereas the psychology of the Iranians is, well, there has been no privacy, there's no freedom, there's no independence. We might as well integrate and adapt as much as possible. So, whereas I don't believe in this non-conversion myself personally, I can see the fear that Parsis in India live under, and I can understand the mentality where it comes from. Preserve history, preserve what we have, because once we open it up to everybody else, once we throw away our prayers and say, oh, well, we won't pray this one and we won't pray that one, then we've lost whatever little we had. So I think this is why we are different between Iran and India. It is an inbred almost way of survival that we've had.
Okay,
I think
Maruk.
that is taken, Maruk. That's the different conditions, yes. Exactly, as you said. There were different conditions applying to the two groups.
Yes, in India, we can pray for an hour and a half. Nobody stopped us.
Nobody was going to interrupt your function. Nobody's going to throw a stone at you. You can stay there for as long as. In Iran, we couldn't do that. We are constantly on the run.
Yeah. So it has become inbred, sort of that way of behavior, that we have to isolate, we have to keep within ourselves, we have to do everything that we did before, everything that we learned. In Iran, they didn't have that freedom, so they're used to.
Even today, when you want to go to the burial, to the cemetery in Tehran, it is surrounded by the Revolutionary Guards. They have taken our land. And to get over there, we have to get permission. The gate is manned by the Revolutionary Guards to get into that area. And that land was the land that was allotted to us by Reza Shah. A huge piece of land which has completely been taken over. We just have a part of it.
Yeah, we have a lot to go through. Can we just...
The Aram Ghaz in Yazd and Kerman, they're also in the mountainous area, which was selected because it wasn't, as Maruk saying, land for agriculture. I mean, that's something, it was in the mountainous area, but those are all militarized. So if you want to go to the Aram Ghaz in Kerman or Yazd, you will see that there is a military guard and you have to prove that you are Zartushti to allow you to go in there. Apparently, our ancestors knew how to find strategic locations for the burial. But Maya, if I may, I'd like to add a comment here. You know, since you were giving the history of post the Zoroastrians in Iran after Islam, and going back to what Faribos was covering last week about last time about the freedom fighter. One of the national heroes of Iran who needs to be mentioned here because of what he did. Now, if I mention his name, everybody who got their history lessons in Bombay are going to revolt and say, no, this guy cannot get any good mention. But this is what he did. I mean, he was a very son of sword, they called him. Later, they called him the Napoleon of Iran. He was a bright military guy. But when he came to power out of nowhere, one of the first things he did, he looked at the book of states, you know, the expenses. They showed him 3 lines. This was the military, the cost of the military, the bureaucracy. The third one was for the Shiite clergy. You know, these were the top rank. And he asked them, what the hell is this now? Number 3 for the Shiites. And he put a red line across it saying, no, we are not going to pay them a penny anymore. So he basically cut all the clergy out of the payroll. They came and complained and they said, no, you have to go and do something productive with your time. You can't just be praying. The one thing he said that was really golden, he said every mullah, every ayatollah has to be hanged twice. Once because they live a most unproductive life than anybody else. Number 2 is because they fill the head of the people with superstitious, with nonsense, and make them robots. And do you know who this guy was? The guy you didn't even want to mention his name, where you went from, Afghans to Zan. No, he was Nadir Shah. And, you should also understand what happened in India, because that's where he's getting a bad rap. I mean, the guys, the Afghans who attacked and ransacked Iran, they ran to Delhi. So he went all the way to the eastern Iran and sent an emissary to the Mughal Empire saying, return these guys, these are all traitors. He sent twice emissaries, his emissaries were killed the second time. So he had no other alternative but to declare war. And of course, there was an epic war that happened. And when he got into Delhi, the event that he's getting very bad mark for is that he went to this Sunni mosque. And there, people shot at him. And he got really angry and he ordered his soldiers to start shooting at the people. That was.
Are you talking of Muhammad of Ghazni?
No, that was Nadir Shah.
Nadir Shah. Nadir
Right,
Shah.
and the point is,
okay.
he defeated both. After he came back from India, he went against the Ottomans and the Russians who had invaded and taken territory and took care of both of them. So although he had a very short, bloody life, but he was a national hero in the sense that he restored Iran.
Okay, can we continue? There are a lot of questions in the chat box. So,
Yeah,
but Maruk, go ahead. You have a.
Yeah, I am just trying to understand. Yes, history has to be a guide. It's important for us to understand our history and to see where we've come from. But being here on the North American continent, I think it really behooves us to make a distinction or understand the difference between ethnicity and religion. When we are trying to say, consider ourselves as Parsis, it's also an ethnicity. The religion is Zoroastrianism. And on my personal journey, trying to find the essence of our religion, I find myself trying to find or trying to search for the real teachings of Zarathustra that are embedded in the Gathas. And I'm also confused that we've had such beautiful transcripts, such beautiful scriptures in our Gathas. Why have they not been inserted in our prayers much more? We see bits and pieces of these verses, the yasnas, in our prayers, but we never see the whole entire Gothic scriptures that really takes us into an understanding of what Zarathustra was really trying to say. Now, this is my personal view, my personal journey, but that is where I find myself going towards.
That's for one thing, we are deviating from the course, but to answer your question very briefly, you will find the answer to your question in the current Fazana issue in the very back, page 129.
Thank you.
All right. Okay.
And we are going to talk about that next week a little bit.
Karishma had a question for Fariburs, actually. Fariburs, in what way has a religion become Abrahamic, according to you, please? And then the question is, with reference to your statement, the religion became Abrahamic.
We'll talk about it, as I said, next week. We have a whole so to say, devoted to the evolution of Zoroastrianism.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that next week.
Delphina has a question. If it was so difficult to practice a religion in Iran, who took care of the fire temples there? There were priests. It wasn't totally priest-free. There were probably not too many, but there were maybe a handful. I don't have a number, but I'm sure there were some, and they tended to the temples.
No, there were many priests. We have a full village that was the village of the priests. They had come from Shiraz, the main priests. They first left where Sharifabad, it's higher up, Sharifabad. Then there is Pir Banu. There's a place of pilgrimage called Pir Banu. They lived over there. Then the government saw that these are Mubeds and they have to be close to the governor because they can create problem. So they have to be close to government. They moved the complete village down to the city of Yazd where the governors were. And today it's called Malat. And in that Malat, all the priestly family and those that were connected to the priests live over there. They had a village in the city.
Okay, next question from her again. Is the practice of a Dakmanishi still existing? The answer is no. Faribuza said that. Anything Dr. Zoroastrian said no. Dakmanishi does not
The
exist.
Dakhma is there, but it is not used.
Is not used.
It's a tourist destination.
By the way, Maya, the Dakhma, the reason they start using the Dakhma is when the medical school in Tehran was started. The robbers would go and snatch the bodies.
Yes.
So,
I will talk about that next week. Yes, you're right. That's going to be one of the points I'll make next week. Freddie has a question. Do the Zoroastrians in Iran have to take up their custody in Tehran Agyari today?
You don't have to take it out, but they took it out because it's very easy for it to come out from your shirt and it hangs over there and people will pull it. And so the practice was sort of avoided, and they had some hanging in the Agyari so that people who go there can at least have the kashti if they have not brought it with them. So it was not a practice, it was just convenient.
Oh. Are you doing it today?
No, today it's not there. Today it's not like that.
Okay.
It used to be once upon a time, but now things are better, so to say. And those who want to have kashti have it. Those who don't want to have, don't have it.
Also, I think that going to the earlier question about the priests in Agyari, I think it's possible, or is it today, do they have women tending fires in Agyaris like priests now?
No, they are Mubediyars.
Mubediyars, yeah, but not.
They're not priests. No, they're Mubediyars.
Okay. Thank you.
Farida Basania had a question. When we were in Yazd in 2002, we were told that the last time the Dakhma was used was in 1974, which is making a comment. So thank you. Then Dr. Zoroastrian talks about Nadir Shah. He's already addressed that in detail. So thank you for that. Arya has made some comments. He's answered some questions, how the women were treated. Correct answer. Freddie, again, there are various numbers mentioned regarding the number of Zoroastrians that came from Iran. Different historians and travelers mention different numbers. Hard to, my answer is hard to give you anyone a specific number. It all depends on the information that you receive, and historians are going to give their answer based on that, and that's my answer. I don't know if Faribuza has a better answer than that.
No, there's no way we can know. There's nothing, and this number which were left in Iran, that's only because Maneckji had to report. And he reported to India the exact numbers. And of course, there's a French ambassador who has said 7,000. So they're very close.
Okay, Freddie again makes another comment. Excuse me. Revived are the customs which were there at the time when the Parsi priests visited Iran. The customs change constantly. The customs change constantly. We do not know what the funeral ceremony was during the Parthian and early dynasties. In North America, we have modified our customs and ceremonies too. Even today, there are no eulogies in India. or serving food to everyone during Muqtad. Okay, just Cyrus Mir, Faribors, Faribors, are you hoping to convey that the rigidity of the Indian Zoroastrians is causing our community to become stagnant, as opposed to Iranian Zoroastrians who are more open to reformation and accepting of contemporary times?
But we are not converting in Iran either. So the question of conversion is out. In Iran, if you convert, both the converter and the convertee will be hanged.
You can convert from any religion to Islam, but the other way around, as Faribur said,
you're murtad. It's part of the Quran. You're murtad, and a murtad has to be killed. And anyone can kill, and no law can. If you're in an Islamic country, you can kill the murtad, and you will not be punished.
My question was more in terms of how it is, accepted in more contemporary times, right? It's like, I think you mentioned that the prayers were shortened, in Iran and stuff like that. Is that more of a reaction to the fact that, in modern times, there is maybe perhaps less appetite for sitting through longer prayers, and in that way, the Iranian Zoroastrians are a little bit more open to reformation, versus the Indian Zoroastrians are a little bit more clingy to their traditions.
Exactly.
Despite whatever it might maybe detriment, maybe not.
Exactly. That is just to satisfy our own people, nothing to do with any pressure from anywhere. It's between us.
Okay, Karishma has a question. This one is for Tempton, actually. Would the NAMC please be able to do a booth at the World Zoroastrian Congress, please, to share the knowledge? Thank you.
Yeah, there will be a segment about the Mobids, and we will cover some work that the NAMC does in that segment. Though we asked for a booth, but they told us that they are not offering it to anyone. We will have some presence. We will be giving out information. We will be also promoting all these events that we are doing, so more people know about it. But we would really like to advertise as much as possible. And if you are there, feel free to be our ambassador. And as a senior, they will, as a senior member of our community, Jaruanti, people respect you a lot, and they will listen to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, if not, then we are at the end of today's class. Next week, it's going to be quite interesting. So I would ask all of you to join. Please be there. We're going to talk about some interesting stuff. Both Fariburs and I will have some good information for you. Nothing grand, some tidbits, but very interesting tidbits, which I think you will enjoy. And one last point, the assignment for this week, this coming week, what was I'll send an email out on this, but just to give you a heads up, what was the fate of the Zoroastrians in Iran in the 18th and 19th centuries? And with that, we say thank you. Have a great week. And we look forward to see you all next Saturday. Please join.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
See you.